My son Ethan laughed when I dragged that old metal toolbox out of the garage. "Mom, you should have thrown that junk away years ago," he
Seriously,
said,
Mom.
shaking
This
his
thing
head like
belongs
it
in a
embarrassed
museum
him.
compared to my new ride.
I almost pushed it
You know
back
that
into the
old thing still
shadows
works
until a
better than you do,
contractor
right?
named Harold Bennett
It's the
stopped
hammer.
mid-step, staring at
It's
it like
really
he'd
the
seen a
hammer.
ghost.
The one your father lost.
He walked closer, hands trembling slightly, and whispered, "Ma'am, do you know what you
These
have here?"
tools help build half the
didn't.
town.
But the way he looked at that worn, scratched box, it was as if it carried the weight of something I had never truly understood about my late husband. And in that moment, I realized maybe I hadn't known him at all. If this story already makes you feel something, I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this, and tell me in the comments. Have you ever underestimated something or someone only to discover the truth too late? After Harold Bennett left that afternoon, I didn't go back inside right away. I stayed in the garage, standing in front of that old metal toolbox, like it had suddenly become something alive, something watching me, waiting for me to finally understand it. It had always been there, for decades, scratched, dented paint peeling in quiet flakes. The handle worn smooth from years of use. I had passed it 1,000 times without a second thought. To me, it was just Richard's box, just another piece of a life that had slowly faded into memory after he passed. But now, I wasn't so sure. I reached down and brushed a thin layer of dust from the top. My fingers traced over the faint initials carved into the corner, R.W. Richard Winslow. My husband. A man the world had never noticed, or so I thought. Richard had never been the kind of man who filled a room. He didn't talk loudly. He didn't brag. He didn't chase attention. If anything, he moved through life like someone who preferred to stay just outside the spotlight. But he worked. God, how he worked. When we first met, he was already building things small at first. Decks, fences, kitchen cabinets. He used to come home with sawdust in his hair and little cuts on his hands that he barely noticed. I'd fuss over them, and he'd just smile that quiet smile of his like none of it mattered. "Work's honest," he used to say. "That's enough for me." We didn't have much back then. Our first house was barely more than a fixer-upper on the edge of town. The floors creaked, the plumbing rattled, and in the winter, the cold seemed to slip in through every crack. But Richard never complained. Instead, he fixed things. Piece by piece, board by board, he rebuilt that house with his own hands. And that toolbox, it was always there beside him. Every nail he drove, every beam he cut, every joint he sanded, it all came from that box. I remember sitting on the porch one evening, watching him work under the fading light. "You ever think about going bigger?" I asked him. "Taking on bigger projects. Hiring a crew." He didn't even look up, just kept measuring a plank steady and precise. "I've been asked," he said simply. I frowned. "Asked by who?" He paused, then just for a moment before driving the nail in. "People," he replied. That was it. No names, no details, just people. At the time, I didn't push. That was Richard. He kept things close, like he believed some parts of life didn't need to be explained. But now, standing there in that garage, Harold's words echoing in my mind, I couldn't help but wonder. What kind of people had asked him, and what exactly had he turned down? Because I remembered something else too. There were times, rare but unmistakable, when Richard would come home different. Not tired, not physically exhausted, but quiet in a way that felt heavier than usual. He would wash his hands at the sink longer than necessary, staring down at the water, like he was trying to rinse off more than just dust and grime. "Everything okay?" I would ask. He'd nod. "Yeah, just a long day." But there was something in his eyes, something distant. like he had left a part of himself behind, somewhere he couldn't talk about. I used to think it was just stress, just the weight of providing for a family. Now I wasn't so sure. I knelt down and opened the toolbox slowly. The hinges creaked stiff with age. Inside, everything was exactly as he had left it. The hammer with the worn wooden handle, the measuring tape with faded markings, the chisels sharpened so carefully they still gleamed faintly under the garage light. But what struck me most wasn't how old they were. It was how deliberate everything looked. Each tool had its place. Each modification, small carvings, reinforced grips, subtle adjustments, looked intentional. Not random wear and tear, but careful improvements. Like he had been perfecting them. I picked up one of the chisels, running my thumb along the handle. There was a small groove carved into it, shaped to fit the curve of a hand. His hand. How many hours had he spent holding this? How many structures had begun with tools like these? A sudden memory hit me clearer than anything else. One night, years ago, I had woken up around 2 a.m. The house was quiet, except for a faint sound coming from the garage. I slipped out of bed and walked toward it. The light was on. Richard was inside, hunched over his workbench, adjusting something in the toolbox. Filing, sanding, testing, over and over again. "Richard," I whispered from the doorway. He startled slightly, turning toward me. "Oh, hey," he said a little too quickly. "Didn't mean to wake you." "What are you doing?" I asked. He hesitated. Then he gave me that same quiet smile. "Just fixing a few things." I stepped closer, looking at the tools spread out before him. "You've been at this all night?" He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." But that wasn't it. I knew it then, and I knew it even more now. He wasn't just fixing tools. He was refining something, preparing for something, and yet he never told me what. I closed the toolbox gently, my chest tightening. All those years, I thought I understood the man I had built a life with. I thought I knew his world, simple, honest, small. But what if it hadn't been small at all? What if I had only ever seen the surface? A car passed by outside, snapping me back to the present. I stood up slowly, glancing toward the house. Ethan was inside, probably on his phone already, forgetting about the toolbox, about Harold, about everything that had just happened. To him, his father had been nothing more than a man who worked with his hands. A man who never made it big. A man who never left a mark. And for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Because maybe, just maybe, that wasn't true. Maybe Richard Winslow had left a mark so deep it had been erased. And if that was the case, then I had spent years living beside a story I never bothered to uncover. I placed my hand on the toolbox one last time. "Who were you, Richard?" I whispered, and somehow I had the feeling that this box was finally going to answer me. Ethan didn't stay long that day. He never really did. Even when he visited, it always felt like he was halfway out the door, checking his watch, glancing at his phone, mentally somewhere else entirely. The house he grew up in had become to him more of a stop than a place. "Mom, I've got an early call tomorrow," he said as he grabbed his coat. "I should head back tonight." I nodded, trying not to let the disappointment show too clearly. "You just got here this morning." I know he sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. But things move fast where I work. I can't just disappear for a weekend. That was Ethan. Always moving. Always chasing something bigger. I followed him to the front door, folding my arms against the cool evening air that slipped in as he opened it. "Ethan?" I said softly. He paused, one hand on the doorframe, but he didn't turn around right away. "What is it?" I hesitated. I wanted to tell him about Harold, about the way that man had looked at his father's toolbox, like it belonged in a museum instead of our dusty garage. I wanted to tell him something didn't add up. But when I looked at my son, his tailored coat, his polished shoes, the faint impatience in the way he shifted his weight, I already knew what he would say. Still, I tried. That toolbox, I began carefully. The man who stopped by earlier, he said something strange about it. Ethan finally turned, raising an eyebrow. Strange how, he said it helped build half the town. For a split second, there was silence. Then Ethan let out a short laugh. Come on, Mom. I'm serious, I said a little more firmly. He shook his head, stepping fully outside now. That's exactly what I mean, he said. People love exaggerating things like that. It's a small town. Someone sees an old tool and suddenly it's historic. That's not what it felt like, I insisted. Ethan gave me a look, gentle but dismissive. You're reading too much into it, he said. Dad was a good guy, okay? A hard worker, but he wasn't some hidden legend. The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were final. That was how my son saw his father. A good man, but nothing more. I swallowed, forcing a small smile. I know he worked hard, and that's something to be proud of. Ethan added quickly, as if he thought he was softening the blow. But let's not turn it into something it wasn't. Something it wasn't. The phrase echoed in my mind long after he had driven away. Ethan had always been different from his father. Even as a boy, he had a restless energy about him. While other kids were content playing in the yard, Ethan wanted more bigger toys, faster bikes, better everything. And Richard, he never tried to crush that. In fact, he admired it in his own quiet way. He's going to go farther than I ever did, Richard once told me, watching Ethan leave for his first day of college. There had been pride in his voice. But something else, too. Something I hadn't understood at the time. Now I wondered if it had been distance. Because the truth was, the older Ethan got, the further he drifted from the life Richard knew. I remembered one particular evening years ago. Ethan had just come home from college for the summer. He stood in the kitchen, dressed sharper than I'd ever seen him talking about internships and networking events. I've got an opportunity in Chicago, he said, excitement lighting up his face. Finance firm, real money, Mom, real growth. That's great, son, I said, genuinely happy for him. Richard leaned against the counter, listening quietly. After a moment, he spoke. You ever think about learning the trade, he asked. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. What trade? Richard gestured toward the back door where the garage stood just beyond. Building, he said simply. Working with your hands. There's good work in it, honest work. Ethan let out a small chuckle. Dad, I'm not trying to build decks for a living. The room went still. Richard didn't react right away. He just nodded slowly. It's more than decks, he said. I know, Ethan replied, but there was a hint of impatience now. But that's not the path I want. And what path is that? Ethan straightened, his voice sharpening just slightly. The kind where I don't have to worry about money every month. The kind where I can actually build something bigger. Richard held his gaze. And you don't think this is building something? Ethan hesitated. Then he said the words I don't think he ever truly understood. Not really. I remember the silence that followed. Heavy, uncomfortable. Richard didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just nodded again and walked out to the garage. At the time, I thought it was just a disagreement, a normal clash between generations. But now I saw it differently. Because maybe in that moment something had broken. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way Richard did everything. Back in the present, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table long after Ethan had left. The house felt too quiet, too still. I glanced toward the window where the faint outline of the garage stood in the distance. That toolbox was still in there, waiting. And for the first time, I felt a strange pull toward it. Not just curiosity, something deeper. Like a thread connecting the man I thought I knew to a truth I had never been allowed to see. Ethan believed his father had been small, ordinary, forgettable. But Harold Bennett's face told a different story. And if there was even a chance that story was real, then I owed it to Richard to find out. Because maybe my son wasn't the only one who had underestimated him. Maybe I had too. Harold Bennett came back the next morning. I wasn't expecting him. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. For a moment, I thought maybe Ethan had forgotten something and turned around. But when I looked out the window, I saw a different truck holder, dust-covered with a company logo, faded almost beyond recognition. Harold stepped out slowly, like a man approaching something important, something he wasn't quite sure he was ready to face. I opened the door before he even knocked. "Mr. Bennett," I said, a little surprised. "Everything okay?" He gave me a polite nod, but his eyes were already drifting past me toward the garage. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. I couldn't stop thinking about that toolbox. There was something in his voice, something heavier than simple curiosity. I stepped aside. "It's still where you saw it," I told him. He didn't waste a second. We walked together across the yard, the morning air still cool, carrying that quiet kind of stillness that comes before something changes. Inside the garage, the toolbox sat exactly where I had left it. But now it felt different. Not like an object, more like evidence. Harold approached it slowly, almost reverently. He didn't touch it right away. Instead, he circled it, studying every dent, every scratch, every inch of worn metal, like he was reading a language only he understood. Finally, he knelt down. "May I?" he asked. I nodded. He opened the lid carefully, as if he expected it to resist him. When it didn't, he exhaled, slow, controlled, and reached inside. He picked up the hammer first, turned it in his hands. His fingers traced the handle, stopping at the same carved groove I had noticed the day before. "Hand-shaped," he murmured. "Custom grip." He looked up at me. "Your husband did this himself?" "Yes," I said. He was always adjusting things. Harold let out a quiet, almost disbelieving breath. "Not adjusting," he said. "Perfecting." The word hung in the air. He set the hammer down and picked up another tool, a level. But this one wasn't like any level I had ever seen. It had small modifications along the sides, tiny calibrations etched into the metal, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Harold leaned closer, squinting. "God," he whispered. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a breath. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, holding the level in both hands, like it was something fragile. "Do you know how hard it is to get precision like this?" he said finally. Even with modern equipment, I shook my head. "This..." He turned it slightly so the light caught the markings. "This isn't just skill. This is obsession. This is someone who refused to settle for anything less than exact." I felt a strange chill run through me. That sounded like Richard, but not the version of him I had allowed myself to see. Harold placed the level back down and began examining the rest of the toolbox more quickly, now his movements gaining urgency. Each tool seemed to confirm something in his mind. Each detail pushed him further into a realization he could no longer ignore. Then he stopped, completely still. His hand hovered over a chisel. Slowly, he picked it up. I saw the moment it hit him. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes widened just slightly. What I asked, my heart beginning to pound. He turned the chisel toward me, pointing to a small marking near the base. At first, I thought it was just a maker's mark, he said. But it's not. What is it? He swallowed. It's a signature. The word sent a jolt through me. A signature. He nodded. I've seen this before. My breath caught, where Harold hesitated. And for the first time since he arrived, I saw something like uncertainty in his expression. On site, he said slowly. Years ago, there was a project, big one, downtown expansion, high stakes, tight deadline. The structure had a flaw, a serious one. I leaned in slightly. What kind of flaw? The kind that gets people hurt if it's not fixed, he said bluntly. A knot formed in my chest. What happened? Harold let out a long breath, his gaze drifting back to the toolbox. Someone came in late in the process, he said. Didn't make a big deal about it, didn't talk much, just worked. He paused, and somehow overnight the problem was gone. My heart was racing now. You're saying, I'm saying the work was clean, Harold interrupted. Too clean. Whoever did it understood the structure better than the people who designed it. He looked back at me. And I remember seeing this exact marking on a beam, small, almost hidden, like the person didn't want credit. I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. Richard never told me anything about that, I whispered. Harold nodded, like he expected that. Men like that don't, he said quietly. Silence settled between us, heavy, charged. Then I asked the question that had been building inside me since the moment he arrived. Why wouldn't he take credit? Harold's jaw tightened. That's the part that never made sense, he admitted. Because the official story. He trailed off. What official story? I pressed. He hesitated again. Then finally he said it. The credit went to the firm. Which firm? Harold looked at me carefully, like he was measuring how much I could handle. Whitman Development Group. The name hit me like a distant echo. Familiar. Too familiar. I frowned. I've heard that name before. Harold nodded slowly. Most people around here have. And suddenly, a cold realization crept into my mind. Ethan. I felt my stomach drop. My son. I began, my voice unsteady. He works for a company like that. A big development firm. Harold's expression darkened slightly. Wouldn't surprise me if it was the same one, he said. I stared at the toolbox. At the tools Richard had held, shaped trusted. At the life he had lived right in front of me, without ever revealing the truth. You're telling me, I said slowly, that my husband might have fixed a major structural failure, and someone else took the credit. Harold didn't sugarcoat it. I'm telling you, he said, that your husband was operating at a level most people in this industry never reach. He paused, and someone made sure no one ever knew the garage felt smaller now, the air heavier. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to steady the storm rising inside me. All those years, all those quiet nights, all those moments I thought I understood. And now, piece by piece, it was unraveling. I looked down at the toolbox again, at the scratches, the dents, the marks I had once dismissed as wear and tear. They weren't signs of a small life. They were traces of something much bigger. something hidden, something stolen. And for the first time, I wasn't just curious anymore. I was angry. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt different now, like every wall held something it hadn't told me yet. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Harold's words looping in my mind, operating at a level most people never reach. Someone made sure no one ever knew. It didn't sound like the man I had lived with for over 30 years. Or maybe it sounded exactly like him. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket closer, but the memories wouldn't stop coming. Not the soft ones, not the quiet evenings or simple dinners. No. The ones I had ignored. The ones that didn't make sense back then but did now. There was one night in particular I couldn't shake. It was late, well past midnight. I had woken up because I heard something unusual. Not loud, just wrong. A sound out of place. I remember reaching over to Richard's side of the bed and finding it empty. At first I thought maybe he was in the bathroom, but the light was off. Then I heard it again, a faint metallic scrape from the garage. I slipped out of bed and wrapped a robe around myself, moving quietly down the hallway. The house was dark except for a thin line of light spilling from under the garage door. I pushed it open slowly. Richard was inside. The overhead light cast long shadows across the walls, and he stood at his workbench surrounded by tools. But something about the scene felt intense. Not like his usual calm, methodical work. He was moving faster, sharpening something, testing it, adjusting it, then starting again. Over and over. "Richard," I said softly. He flinched, actually flinched. I had never seen him do that before. "Oh, Teresa," he said, turning quickly. "You startled me." I frowned, stepping closer. "You're up late. Couldn't sleep," he replied a little too quickly. That same line again. But this time, I didn't believe it. There was a tension in his shoulders, a tightness in his jaw. "What are you working on?" I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. Then he stepped slightly to the side, as if to block my view of the workbench. "Just fixing a few tools," he said. I looked past him anyway. The toolbox was open. Tools laid out in a way I had never seen before, not scattered, but arranged with purpose. Measured, precise, like he was preparing for something. "This doesn't look like just fixing," I said gently. Richard gave a small smile, the kind he used when he didn't want to explain something. "You know me," he said. "I like things done right." Normally, that would have been enough. Normally, I would have nodded, kissed him on the cheek, and gone back to bed. But that night, something held me there. "You've been doing this a lot lately?" I said. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a chisel and ran his thumb along the edge, testing the sharpness. Then quietly, he said, "Sometimes a job comes along that needs more than usual." I felt a small chill. "What kind of job?" Again that pause. Then the cough job. Again that pause. Then the K-in where mistakes matter. The words lingered in the air. Heavy, unsettling. "Are you in trouble?" I asked suddenly. He looked up at me surprised. "No," he said quickly. "No, nothing like that." "And where mistakes matter." The words lingered in the air. Heavy, unsettling. "Are you in trouble?" I asked suddenly. He looked up at me surprised. "No," he said quickly. "No, nothing like that." But his voice wasn't fully convincing. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Richard, you can tell me." For a moment, I thought he might. I saw it in his eyes, that flicker of something he almost let out. But then it was gone, replaced by that same calm expression he always wore. "It's just work, Teresa." I saw it in his eyes, that flicker of something he almost let out. But then it was gone, replaced by that same calm expression he always wore. "It's just work, Teresa," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about. Nothing you need to worry about." That was his way. Carrying things alone, shielding us from whatever weight he believed was his to bear. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. But back then, I trusted him. I always trusted him. So I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. He gave me a grateful look, stepping closer and placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I'll be in soon," he said. I watched him for another moment. Then I turned and walked back into the house. But I didn't go straight to bed. Instead, I stood in the hallway listening. The sound of metal against metal. The steady rhythm of someone preparing for something important, something serious. And now, years later, I finally understood. That wasn't just another job. That was pressure. That was responsibility. That was a man carrying something bigger than he ever told me. The memory shifted. Another one surfaced. This one even sharper. It was a few weeks after that night. Richard came home later than usual. Much later. The clock on the wall read nearly 2 a.m. I had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for him. The sound of the door woke me. He stepped inside quietly, trying not to disturb me, but I was already sitting up. "You're late," I said. He froze for just a second, then closed the door behind him. "Yeah," he said. "Ran into some complications." I stood up, studying him more. I stood up, studying him more closely. His clothes were dusty. Not unusual, but his face? There was something different. Relief, mixed with exhaustion, mixed with something else. Something like closely. His clothes were dusty, not unusual, but his face? There was something different. Relief, mixed with exhaustion, mixed with something else. Something like finality. "Are you okay?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It's done." "What's done?" He hesitated. Then he gave that same small smile. "The job." I stepped closer. "Was it bad?" He exhaled slowly. "Could have been," he admitted, "if it wasn't handled right." A knot formed in my stomach. "Handled right how?" He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a brief moment I saw the weight he had been carrying. Not just physical, something deeper, something heavier. Then he shook his head slightly. "It's over now," he said. "That's what matters." I wanted to ask more. I should have asked more, but he looked so tired, so finished, so I let it go, like I always did. Back in the present, I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Those weren't just memories anymore. They were pieces, clues, fragments of a story I had never put together. Until now. Until Harold. Until that toolbox. Richard hadn't just been working late. He hadn't just been fixing tools. He had been preparing for something critical. Something that demanded perfection. Something where mistakes mattered. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. I couldn't stay there anymore. I needed to see it again. The garage, the toolbox, the proof that everything I thought I knew was incomplete. I walked through the dark house, my steps slow but certain. When I reached the garage, I flipped on the light. The toolbox sat there, silent, unassuming. But now I knew better. I stepped closer, my chest tightening. You weren't just fixing things, were you? I whispered. My voice echoed softly in the empty space. You were holding everything together. And somehow, that realization hurt more than anything else, because he had done it alone. I didn't wait long to see Harold again. By morning, I was already dressed, standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. My eyes kept drifting toward the garage, toward the toolbox like it was calling me back. But this time, I didn't want to face it alone. I picked up the phone and dialed the number Harold had scribbled on a piece of paper before leaving. He answered on the second ring. Bennett, it's Teresa Winslow. I said, my voice tighter than I intended. I think I need to talk to you again. There was a brief pause. Then his tone shifted, more serious now. I was hoping you'd call. We met at a small diner just outside town, the kind of place Richard used to like. Quiet, unpretentious, the smell of coffee and fried eggs lingering in the air. Harold was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth near the window. He had a folder in front of him. That alone made my heart skip. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was something deeper, something real. I slid into the seat across from him. Thank you for coming, I said. He nodded. I brought something. He replied, tapping the folder. I stared at it. What is it? He didn't open it right away. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying me. Before I show you this, he said carefully, you need to understand something. My stomach tightened. Okay. What I told you yesterday, he continued, about your husband's skill that wasn't an exaggeration. I nodded slowly. I believe that now. He shook his head. No, he said. I don't think you do. Not fully. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? Harold leaned forward, lowering his voice. I've been in construction for over 30 years, he said. I've worked with some of the best engineers, designers, contractors you can imagine. He paused. And I'm telling you the kind of precision I saw in that toolbox. He shook his head again. That's not normal. That's rare. Extremely rare. My hands tightened around my cup. So, what are you saying? He finally opened the folder. Inside were photographs, blueprints, documents. He slid one toward me. Take a look at that. I picked it up slowly. It was a photo of a building. Familiar. Very familiar. The downtown civic center, I murmured. Harold nodded. Completed about 15 years ago. Big project. High profile. I frowned. What does this have to do with Richard? He slid another paper toward me. A blueprint this time. Marked up. Detailed. Covered in notes. And there in the corner, a small marking. My breath caught. The same one. The same signature Harold had shown me on the chisel. This, I whispered. Harold watched my reaction carefully. That's not the official blueprint, he said. That's a modified version. The one that actually fixed the structural issue. My pulse began to race. You're saying Richard did this? I'm saying Harold replied that this level of correction doesn't come from someone average. He leaned closer. And I saw that mark on site. On a beam. Right after the fix was made, my hands started to tremble slightly. But the building, I said, it's credited to Whitman Development. Harold's expression hardened. Exactly. The word landed like a blow. I looked down at the blueprint again, at the notes, the careful calculations, the precise adjustments. It was him. I knew it, even without seeing him draw it. It felt like him. But why wouldn't he take credit? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Harold exhaled slowly. That's the question that's been bothering me for years. He reached into the folder and pulled out another document. This one wasn't a blueprint. It was a contract, or at least part of one. I managed to get access to some old project records, he said. Not easy. A lot of it's been buried. I scanned the page quickly. Legal language, technical terms. Then one line caught my eye. Independent consultant. My chest tightened. No name? I asked. Harold shook his head. Exactly. I looked up at him. You think that was Richard? I don't think, he said, quietly. I'm almost certain. The diner suddenly felt too small, too quiet, like the truth had sucked all the air out of the room. So they used him, I said slowly. Harold didn't sugarcoat it. Yes. The word burned. They brought him in when things went wrong, he continued. When their engineers couldn't fix something, when a project was at risk. And then? I asked. He held my gaze. They took the credit. A wave of anger surged through me, hot, sharp, unfamiliar. All those years, I whispered. All those nights. He nodded. I think your husband was doing work far beyond what anyone realized, he said. But for some reason, he stayed invisible. I shook my head, struggling to process it. No, he wouldn't just let that happen, I said. Richard wasn't weak. I didn't say he was, Harold replied calmly. Then why? I demanded. Why would he let someone else take everything he worked for? Harold hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. There's more, isn't there? I pressed. He leaned back slightly, folding his hands. There's always more, he said quietly. I felt my heart start to pound again. Tell me. He studied me for a long moment, then finally he spoke. I heard rumors, he said, back then. About one particular deal. My breath caught. What kind of deal? He lowered his voice even further. The kind where someone doesn't have much choice. A chill spread through me, meaning Harold's eyes didn't leave mine, meaning your husband might not have given up credit willingly. The words hit like ice. You think he was forced? I asked. I think Harold said carefully that when money and reputation are on the line, companies like Whitman don't take risks. My mind raced. Are you saying they threatened him? I'm saying, he replied, there are ways to pressure people without leaving a mark. My throat tightened. Richard. The quiet nights. The tension. The way he carried everything alone. It all started to make sense. And suddenly, I remembered something. Something I had buried. Something I hadn't understood back then. There was a time, I said slowly. Years ago, we almost lost the house. Harold leaned forward slightly. What happened? I don't know, I admitted. Richard wouldn't talk about it, just said it was handled. I looked up at him, but it came out of nowhere. Legal letters, deadlines, pressure. Harold's expression darkened. That lines up, he said. With what? With the kind of leverage a company might use. My chest felt tight, so he traded his work for us. I whispered. Harold didn't answer. He didn't need to. I already knew. Tears blurred my vision as I looked down at the blueprint again. All those years I thought he had lived small. I thought he had settled. I thought he had been ordinary. But the truth, he had been protecting us, paying a price I never even saw, and someone else had built an empire on it. I clenched my hands. This wasn't just sadness anymore. This was something else, something stronger, something sharper. They stole from him, I said. Harold nodded. Yes. I took a slow breath, and for the first time since all of this started, I felt something shift inside me. Because now this wasn't just about understanding Richard. This was about something else, something bigger, something that had been buried for far too long, and I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. I didn't wait for Ethan to call. This time, I called him. He answered on the third ring, his voice distracted. Hey, Mom, everything okay? No, I said. There was a pause. That got his attention. What's going on? I need you to come by, I told him. Today. Another pause. I've got meetings, he replied automatically. Can it wait? No, I said firmly. It can't. Something in my tone must have reached him because he exhaled slowly. All right. He'll come by this afternoon. When Ethan walked through the front door a few hours later, I could already see the impatience in his posture. His tie was slightly loosened, his phone still in his hand, thumb moving quickly across the screen. This better be important, he said as he stepped inside. I had to reschedule. It is, I interrupted. He stopped, looked at me, really looked this time, and something in my face must have told him this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. He slipped his phone into his pocket. Okay, he said more quietly. What's going on? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned and walked toward the garage. He hesitated, then followed. When we stepped inside, the toolbox sat exactly where it had been, silent, waiting. Ethan crossed his arms. Mom, he sighed. We already talked about this. No, I said, turning to face him. You talked. I listened. His jaw tightened slightly. All right, then talk. I took a breath. Your father didn't just build decks, Ethan. He looked away for a second, clearly resisting. Mom, I met with Harold Bennett again, I continued. That made him pause. The contractor, he asked. Yes. Ethan frowned slightly, his skepticism returning. And he showed me something. I walked over to the workbench and picked up the folder Harold had given me. I handed it to him. Ethan hesitated before taking it. Then he opened it. At first, his expression didn't change much, just mild curiosity. But as he flipped through the pages, that began to shift. His eyes slowed, focused. He stopped on one of the blueprints. What is this? He asked. The downtown civic center, I said. He looked up at me. I know what it is. I've seen the project files before. Then look closer. He frowned, scanning the page more carefully. And then I saw it. That moment. That flicker of recognition. He leaned in, slightly narrowing his eyes. This isn't the official version, he said. No, I replied. It's the corrected one. Ethan looked back down at it, his expression tightening. Where did you get this, Harold? He flipped to the next page, then the next, each one pulling him deeper into something he hadn't expected. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Why not? Because these corrections. He flipped to the next page, then the next, each one pulling him deeper into something he hadn't expected. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Why not? Because these corrections. He paused, shaking his head slightly. These are advanced, way beyond what most contractors would do. I held his gaze. Your father did them. Ethan froze. For a second, he didn't move at all. Then he let out a short, disbelieving breath. Mom, no. Yes. He shook his head, closing the folder halfway. That's not possible. If he had that level of involvement, his name would be on the project. It wasn't, I said quietly. Then he didn't do it. The certainty in his voice made something inside me snap. Why I demanded, because that's how the system works. Ethan's eyes flashed. Yes, he said, because that's how the industry works. You don't just forget to credit someone at that level. I stepped closer. What if someone made sure he wasn't credited? He stared at me. That doesn't happen. Are you sure I pressed? Yes, he said sharply. Companies don't just erase people, Mom. That's not how Whitman development. The name cut through his sentence like a blade. Ethan went silent, completely silent. Slowly he straightened. Where did you hear that? He asked. From Harold, I said, and from these documents. I tapped the folder in his hands. He said your father worked on projects tied to that company, that they brought him in when things went wrong and then took the credit. Ethan's face hardened. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. You don't know that. He said your father worked on projects tied to that company, that they brought him in when things went wrong and then took the credit. Ethan's face hardened. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. You don't know that. I do, I said, my voice rising slightly. Because I lived with him. I saw the way he worked, the way he carried things he wouldn't talk about. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly now. This is exactly what I was talking about, he said. People romanticize things. They build stories. This isn't a story, I snapped. He stopped. We stood there facing each other, the tension between us thick, unavoidable. You think I want this to be true? I continued, my voice shaking now. You think I want to find out that your father spent his life being used? Ethan didn't answer. You think I want to realize that I didn't even know the man I married? I said, my voice breaking. That hit him. I saw it. For the first time, the certainty in his expression cracked. He exhaled slowly. I don't understand why he wouldn't say anything. Because that's who he was, I said quietly. He protected us, even if it meant staying silent. Ethan looked down at the folder again. His grip on it tightened. This still doesn't prove anything, he muttered, but his voice didn't sound as strong anymore. It proves enough, I said, enough to ask questions. He didn't respond, just stood there thinking. Then after a long silence, he spoke again. Whitman Development is one of the biggest firms in the region, he said slowly. They handle high-level projects, government contracts, corporate developments. I know. They don't make mistakes like this. Or maybe I said they make sure no one sees them. Ethan looked up at me, and this time there was something different in his eyes. Not certainty, not dismissal. Something else. Doubt. I work for them, Mom, he said quietly. I know. That landed harder than anything else. He looked back down at the folder, then at the toolbox, then back at me. You're asking me to believe, he began, his voice unsteady, now that the company I work for built its reputation on people like Dad. I'm asking you to look, I said. Really look. Silence stretched between us again. Long, heavy. Then finally Ethan closed the folder slowly. I'll check, he said. I held my breath. What? I'll look into it, he repeated, internally. Project records, archived files, whatever I can access. Hope flickered in my chest. You will. He nodded, though his expression was still conflicted. I'm not saying I believe it, he added quickly. But if there's even a chance... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because I could see it now. The shift. Small, but real. The beginning of something breaking open. And for the first time since this all started, I felt like I wasn't alone in it anymore. That night, after Ethan left, I didn't sit down. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't even make dinner. Instead, I went straight back to the garage. The air felt heavier than before, like it knew something I didn't. The toolbox sat there unchanged, but I was different now. Before I had looked at it with nostalgia, then curiosity. Now I looked at it with purpose. If Richard had hidden something, if he had left behind pieces of the truth, then they had to be here. I knelt down in front of the toolbox, my fingers resting lightly on the lid. For a moment, I hesitated, because opening it now felt different than before. Like I wasn't just looking at tools anymore. I was opening a door. A door he had never fully let me walk through. "All right, Richard," I whispered. "Show me." I lifted the lid. Everything was as it had been, at least at first glance. But this time, I didn't just look. I searched, carefully, deliberately. I started removing tools one by one, placing them gently on the workbench beside me. Hammer, chisel, level, measuring tape. Each one carrying the weight of years, and now something more. I examined the bottom of the box. Nothing unusual, just worn metal and dust. But something told me not to stop there. Richard had never been careless. If he had hidden something, it wouldn't be obvious. I ran my fingers along the inner edges of the toolbox. Slowly, methodically. Then I felt it. A slight ridge, barely noticeable. My breath caught. I leaned closer, pressing my fingers against it again. There, a seam, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. My heart began to pound. "Richard," I murmured. I grabbed a small screwdriver from the bench and carefully pressed it against the edge. Gently, slowly. The metal shifted, just a fraction. Enough. With a little more pressure, the bottom panel lifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. I froze. For a second, I just stared at it. Because in all the years I had known that toolbox, I had never known this existed. My hands trembled as I carefully lifted the panel. Inside, there was a stack of papers, yellowed with age, edges worn, but intact. I swallowed hard. This was it. I pulled them out slowly, laying them on the bench. The top sheet was a blueprint. Not like the ones Harold had shown me. This one felt edges worn, but intact. I swallowed hard. This was it. I pulled them out slowly, laying them on the bench. The top sheet was a blueprint, not like the ones Harold had shown me. This one felt older, more personal. I spread it open. My breath hitched. It was detailed, intricate, every measurement precise, every note written in that same neat, careful handwriting I had seen in Richard's old notebooks. But what stopped me cold was the title. It was a building, one I recognized instantly. The Riverside Plaza, a massive development project completed years ago. One that had always been credited to Whitman Development. My hands shook as I flipped to the next page. Another blueprint, another building, another major project. All of them connected, all of them familiar, and every single one marked with the same small, deliberate signature. Richard's. "This can't be," I whispered, but it was. It was real. It was all real. And then I saw something that made my stomach drop. A newer document, crisper than the others, less worn. I picked it up carefully. My eyes scanned the page and then stopped. My heart skipped, Because this one was different. It wasn't an old project. It was current, very current. The name of the project sat boldly at the top of the page. I knew it. I had heard Ethan mention it just days ago. The Westbrook Tower development. My chest tightened. No, that wasn't possible. I flipped through these pages quickly. Design schematics, structural corrections, detailed notes in Richard's handwriting. My breathing became shallow. This is his project, I whispered. But that didn't make sense. Richard had been gone for years. So how could... And then it hit me, like a cold wave crashing over everything. They weren't just using his past work. They were still using it, still building off his designs, still profiting from something he never got credit for. My hands clenched around the paper. Ethan. This was the project Ethan was working on. The one he had mentioned so casually. The one he believed was just another step in his career. But it wasn't. It was built on his father's work, his father's mind, his father's sacrifice. I staggered back slightly, gripping the edge of the workbench to steady myself. This wasn't just about the past anymore. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth. This was happening now. Right now. And Ethan, he was standing right in the middle of it. I looked back down at the documents, my heart racing. There were notes in the margins, corrections, warnings, things that had clearly been overlooked or ignored in the official plans. My eyes scanned one particular section, a structural adjustment, critical, necessary. And beneath it, in Richard's handwriting, if this is ignored, long-term instability is likely. A chill ran through me. They hadn't just stolen his work. They had depended on it. And if they were still using it, if they were still cutting corners. Then, I grabbed the papers, my hands shaking. I needed to call Ethan. Now. I rushed inside, barely remembering to close the garage door behind me. My fingers fumbled with my phone as I dialed his number. It rang once, twice. Then Mom, he answered. Everything okay? No, I said, breathless. Ethan, you need to listen to me. What's wrong? I found something, I said, in your father's toolbox. Something you need to see. There was a pause. What kind of something? The Westbrook project, I said. Silence, complete silence. What he said finally. I have your father's original designs, I continued. Corrections, notes, everything. That's not possible, Ethan said quickly. That project it's his, I interrupted. Another pause, longer this time. He's been gone for years, Mom. Ethan said, his voice quieter now. There's no way. They're still using his work, I said. The words hung in the air, heavy, dangerous. And for the first time, Ethan didn't argue right away. Are you sure? He asked slowly. I looked down at the papers in my hands. At the handwriting I knew better than anyone. At the warnings, the precision, the truth. Yes, I said. There was a long silence on the other end. Then finally, I'm coming over, Ethan said. He hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there, phone still in my hand, my heart pounding. Everything had just changed. This wasn't just about uncovering what happened to Richard. This was about stopping it from happening again. And this time, we weren't going to stay silent. Ethan arrived faster than I expected. The moment I heard his car pull into the driveway, I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just another conversation. This was the moment everything would either fall apart or finally make sense. The front door opened without hesitation. Mom, he called out. In here, I answered from the kitchen. He walked in quickly, his usual composure replaced with something else: urgency, concern, fear. "Show me," he said. No small talk, no resistance, just those two words. I nodded and led him straight to the garage. The toolbox was still open, the hidden compartment exposed. The papers spread across the workbench like a story that had finally decided to tell itself. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes scanning everything in silence. Then he picked up the Westbrook documents, slowly, carefully, like he was afraid they might disappear. "This," he whispered, "this is our internal layout." I said nothing. I didn't need to. He flipped through the pages, his expression shifting with every detail he recognized. "These corrections," he muttered. "They're not in the official system." He looked up at me, something sharp in his eyes now. "They're better." A strange mix of pride and heartbreak rose inside me. "That's your father?" I said softly. Ethan swallowed, looking back down at the documents. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled slowly and set the papers down. "There's only one way to confirm this," he said. "How?" "I need to access archived records," he replied. "Old internal contracts, consultant logs. If he was ever officially involved, even indirectly, there will be a trace." I nodded. "Then do it." That evening felt longer than any I could remember. Ethan didn't stay. He left with the documents carefully photographed, scanned, and backed up, and promised to call me as soon as he found something. So I waited, and as I waited, I remembered. Not the tools, not the work, but us. The life we had built together. The moments I thought were simple, but now carried meaning I had never seen before. There was a day I had almost forgotten. A bad day, one of the worst. It was years ago. I had been driving back from town when the accident happened. A truck ran a red light. I didn't even see it coming. The impact was sudden, violent. Everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, machines around me, pain everywhere, and Richard sitting beside me, his hand wrapped around mine, tighter than I had ever felt before. "Hey," he whispered when I opened my eyes. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. "What happened?" I managed. "You're okay," he said quickly. "That's what matters." But I could see it in his face. The fear, the exhaustion, the strain. "How bad?" I asked. He hesitated, then quietly. It was close. A chill ran through me. "Am I going to be okay?" "Yes," he said firmly, but there was something behind it, something he wasn't saying. "How?" I pressed. Richard looked down for a moment, then back at me. "I took care of it," he said. That was all. That was always all. And back then, I didn't question it. I trusted him, completely. Now sitting alone in the present, I felt my breath catch. I took care of it. That wasn't just reassurance. That was a decision, a trade, a sacrifice. My heart began to race. No, it couldn't be. Could it? Just then, my phone rang. Ethan. I grabbed it instantly. Ethan. His voice on the other end was different, quieter, heavier. "Mom," he said. Something dropped inside me. "What did you find?" Just then my phone rang. Ethan. I grabbed it instantly. Ethan. His voice on the other end was different, quieter, heavier. "Mom," he said. Something dropped inside me. "What did you find?" There was a pause. Then, you were right. My eyes closed for a moment. Not relief. Not yet. Because I knew there was more. What do you mean? I asked. I accessed old records, he said. Internal archives, restricted files, things most employees don't even know exist. My grip tightened on the phone, and I found a contract, he said. My heart pounded. Whose name was on it? There was a long silence. Then he answered. No one's. My breath caught. What? It was listed as external consultant, he explained. No official identity, no public record. My mind spun. But he continued, his voice tightening. There were attachments. What kind of attachments? Payment records, he said. I held my breath, and they were routed through a legal intermediary, he said, not directly to the consultant. A cold realization crept in. They were hiding him, I whispered. Yes. The word landed like a stone. But that's not all, Ethan added. My chest tightened again. What else? There was another pause, longer this time, as if he was choosing his words carefully. I found something tied to that contract, he said slowly. A legal dispute. My heart skipped. What kind of dispute? Ethan exhaled. Medical. Everything inside me froze. Medical, I repeated. Yes, he said. There was a lawsuit, not filed, but prepared. My mind raced. For who? Another pause. Then, for you. The world seemed to stop. What? The documents reference a severe accident, he continued. Insurance complications. Liability. Insurance complications? Liability issues. My legs felt weak. No. They were going to fight coverage, he said. Deny responsibility. Push costs onto the patient. My breathing became shallow. That was me, I whispered. Yes. Silence filled the space between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. And then I asked, my voice barely holding. They didn't proceed with it. My breathing became shallow. That was me, I whispered. Yes. Silence filled the space between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. And then I asked, my voice barely holding. They didn't proceed with it, Ethan said. The case was dropped. Why? Another pause. And then, because a private agreement was reached. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. What kind of agreement? Ethan's voice softened. The consultant signed over intellectual contributions, design rights, future claims. My hand trembled. In exchange for Ethan didn't hesitate this time. For full medical coverage, he said quietly. And the lawsuit being buried. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. No, I whispered, but deep down I already knew. He gave up everything, I said. Yes, to save me. Yes. Tears blurred my vision. All those years, all those quiet nights, all those things he never told me. He hadn't been hiding weakness. He had been protecting me, protecting us, and I had never even known. I thought I choked. I thought he just lived small. Ethan didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was thick. I thought that too. The words broke something between us, something that had been there for years. Distance, misunderstanding, pride. All this time I whispered. He was carrying it alone. Yes. Silence again. But this time it felt different. Not empty, but full. Full of truth. full of grief, full of something we could no longer ignore. They built everything on him, I said. Ethan's voice hardened slightly, and they never gave it back. I wiped my tears slowly, looking out toward the garage, toward the toolbox, toward the life I thought I understood, but didn't. Not fully. Not until now. We're not letting this stay buried, I said. Ethan didn't hesitate. No, he replied, and for the first time, we were on the same side. The next morning felt different. Not quiet, not heavy, focused. For the first time since all of this started, I wasn't just reacting to the truth. I was moving toward it. Ethan arrived early, earlier than I had ever seen him willingly show up for anything that didn't involve work. But this was work now, just not the kind he was used to. He walked in with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder, his expression serious, determined. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied. We didn't waste time. We went straight to the kitchen table. The papers were already laid out, organized. Every blueprint, every note, every piece of Richard that we had uncovered so far. Ethan set his laptop down and opened it quickly. "I pulled more records last night," he said. "What kind?" "Internal communications," he replied. "Archived emails, project logs, things they didn't think anyone would revisit." I sat down across from him, my heart steady but alert, and he turned the screen slightly so I could see. "There's a pattern," he said. I leaned closer. Emails, dozens of them, some short, some detailed, all tied to major projects. But what stood out wasn't what was written. It was what wasn't. Names were missing. References were vague. Phrases like external correction applied. Consultant input received. Issue resolved off record. My chest tightened. "They never say who," I whispered. Ethan nodded. "They didn't want to." He clicked into one of the threads. "This one is about Riverside Plaza," he said. "The same project we found in the toolbox." I scanned the messages. Engineers debating, managers escalating concerns, deadlines tightening, pressure building, then A shift. One email, short, cold. Proceed with external consultant solution. Ensure documentation remains internal. My stomach dropped. They knew, I said. "Yes," Ethan replied, "and they covered it." He leaned back slightly, running a hand over his face. "This isn't just a one-time thing, Mom. This is systematic." The word hung in the air. Systematic. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. A system. Built on silence. Built on people like Richard. I looked down at the papers again. "At least now we know," I said. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Now we know." But then his face darkened, Dia. He said, "Now we know." But then his expression shifted. Subtly. Something darker. "Knowing isn't enough," he added. I looked up. "What do you mean?" He hesitated for a moment. "Then, if we bring this forward, it's not going to be simple. I already knew that." "Go on." Ethan closed his laptop, halfway focusing on me. "This company," he said, "they have lawyers, influence, money, a reputation they'll protect at all costs." I held his gaze. And if we challenge that," he continued, "they're going to push back. Hard." A quiet settled between us. Not fear, but awareness. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying we need to be careful," he replied. "Strategic." I nodded slowly. "And what does that look like?" Ethan leaned forward again, his voice steady. "It means we don't just walk in there and accuse them," he said. We build a case. My heart tightened slightly. A legal case. Maybe, he said. Or at least something strong enough that they can't ignore it. I thought about that, about Richard, about everything he had given up. He never fought back, I said quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened. No, he said. He didn't. And now we do, I replied. There was no hesitation in my voice. None at all. Ethan looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Yeah, he said. Now we do. The next few hours passed in a blur, but it wasn't chaos. It was methodical, focused. We organized everything. Old blueprints from the toolbox, the hidden compartment documents, Harold's materials, Ethan's internal records. Piece by piece, a picture formed, clearer, stronger. Impossible to ignore. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen table looked like something out of an investigation. Not a home, not a memory, but a case. And at the center of it all, Richard. Look at this, Ethan said, pointing to a document. I leaned in. What is it? A timeline, he explained. I mapped out the projects tied to these emails and cross-referenced them with the designs we found. My eyes scanned the page, dates, projects, connections, and then I saw it, a pattern. Every time a project hit trouble, there was a gap, a delay, and then resolution, with no official explanation. That's when he stepped in. I said. Ethan nodded. Every time. A mix of pride and anger surged through me. He saved them? I whispered. Yes, Ethan said. And they buried him. Yes. Silence again. But this time it felt like fuel. Later, as the sun began to set, Ethan closed his laptop and leaned back. There's one more thing, he said. I looked at him. What? He hesitated. Then I requested access to executive-level archives. My heart skipped. Can you do that? Not easily, he admitted, but I have clearance for certain projects. Enough to raise questions. And he exhaled slowly. They noticed. A chill ran through me. Who noticed management? He said. My supervisor reached out this morning. My stomach tightened. What did he say? He asked why I was digging into old files. Ethan replied. Said it wasn't relevant to my current work. And what did you tell him? That I was reviewing structural patterns for Westbrook, Ethan said. Did he believe you? Ethan gave a small, humorless smile. Not completely. That worried me. Ethan, I know, he said quickly. This is where it gets complicated. I leaned forward. How complicated? He looked at me directly. They're watching now. The words settled heavily. You mean, he said if we push this further, they're going to know. I felt my pulse quicken. And then what Ethan didn't answer right away, because we both already knew. They won't like it, he said, finally. No, I agreed. They might try to shut it down, he added. I'm sure they will. Another pause. Then Ethan straightened slightly. But that doesn't change anything, he said. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't just see my son. I saw someone standing up, not for himself, for his father, for the truth. No, I said firmly, it doesn't. We sat there in silence for a moment. The weight of what we had just seen was heavy in silence for a moment. The weight of what we were about to do settling in. This wasn't just about uncovering the past anymore. This was about confronting something powerful, something that had stayed hidden for years, and we were about to walk straight into it. Then we need to decide, Ethan said. Decide what? How far we're willing to go. I didn't hesitate. All the way, I said. My voice didn't shake, didn't falter. Because this wasn't just about justice. It was about honoring the man who had given everything without ever asking for anything in return. Ethan nodded slowly. All right, he said. He closed his laptop, stood up, and looked at me. Then we take this to them. A quiet tension filled the room, the kind that comes before something irreversible. Whitman, I said. Ethan met my gaze. Whitman. And just like that, the next step was set. The building was taller than I expected. Cold glass, sharp edges. Everything about it felt intentional. Like it was designed not just to impress, but to intimidate. I stood in the lobby beside Ethan, clutching my bag a little tighter than I needed to. Inside it, copies of everything. Richard's work, his truth, our proof. You ready? Ethan asked quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him. This was his world, his career, everything he had built for himself. And now, he was about to challenge it. Because of his father. Because of the truth. I am, I said. He nodded once, then led the way to the front desk. We were escorted upstairs, not to some open office, not to a conference room, but to a private executive suite. That told me everything. They already knew. The door opened. 3 people were inside. 2 men, 1 woman, all dressed in the kind of quiet, expensive confidence that didn't need to announce itself. The man in the center stood as we entered. Tall, gray at the temples, measured in every movement. Ethan, he said, his tone controlled. Good to see you. Ethan didn't smile. Mr. Whitman. So this was him. The name behind everything. The one who had built an empire. On silence. On people like Richard. Whitman's eyes shifted to me. And you must be Mrs. Winslow. I stepped forward slightly. Teresa Winslow. He nodded politely. Please have a seat. We didn't. Not at first. Because sitting felt like agreeing to something. And I wasn't ready to agree to anything. We won't take much of your time, Ethan said. Whitman's expression didn't change. I suspect you already have, he replied. A subtle warning, but Ethan didn't back down. Then you know why we're here. Whitman gestured toward the table. Let's sit, he said calmly. This time we did, because the conversation had begun. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Whitman folded his hands neatly in front of him. You've been accessing restricted archives, he said, looking directly at Ethan. Yes. You understand that's outside the scope of your role. I understand exactly what I accessed, Ethan replied. Whitman held his gaze. And what did you find? Ethan didn't hesitate. Evidence. The word landed cleanly. No hesitation, no fear. Whitman's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Evidence of what? This was it. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Slowly, deliberately, I placed it on the table and slid it toward him. Of my husband's work, I said. The room shifted, not visibly, but I felt it. Whitman glanced down at the folder, then back at me. Your husband, Richard Winslow, I said. For the first time, there was a flicker. Small, but real. Recognition. He knew the name. I saw it, and that was enough. You've used his designs. I continued. His corrections. His solutions. Whitman didn't touch the folder. Mrs. Winslow, he said evenly, we work with many consultants over the years. He wasn't just a consultant, I replied. No, I said. He was the one who fixed your failures. The air tightened instantly. One of the other men shifted slightly in his seat. Whitman, however, remained still. Calm. Controlled. That's a strong accusation, he said. It's the truth. Ethan leaned forward. We have documentation, he added. Internal emails, project timelines, structural corrections that match his original work. Whitman's gaze moved to him. And you believe that proves ownership? Ethan didn't hesitate. It proves contribution, he said. Significant contribution. Whitman finally reached for the folder, opened it, flipped through a few pages. Slowly, carefully, like a man who already knew what he would find. These are copies, he said. Yes, I replied. Do you have originals? I felt a small flicker of satisfaction, because that question, like a man who already knew what he would find. These are copies, he said. Yes, I replied. Do you have originals? I felt a small flicker of satisfaction, because that question meant something. Yes, I said. We do. Whitman closed the folder gently. Set it down, then leaned back. I see, he said. Silence stretched. Then, let's be clear, he continued. Even if your husband contributed to certain projects, any work done under contract belongs to the company. My chest tightened. There was no proper credit, I said. That's not always how consulting works. There was no acknowledgement, I said. That's not a legal requirement. My chest tightened. There was no proper credit, I said. That's not always how consulting works. There was no acknowledgement, I pressed. That's not a legal requirement. There was no choice, I said. That made him pause. Just slightly. What do you mean, he asked. I leaned forward, my voice steady. He signed those rights under pressure, I said, to cover medical costs, to protect his family. Whitman's eyes sharpened. That's a serious claim. It's a documented one, Ethan added. We found the agreement tied to the medical dispute. The woman at the table finally spoke. You're suggesting coercion, she said carefully. I'm stating it, I replied. Silence, heavy, charged. Whitman tapped his fingers lightly against the table, thinking, calculating. Then, what is it you want? He asked. The question hung in the air. Simple, but loaded. I looked at Ethan, then back at Whitman. What my husband deserved, I said. And what is that? Recognition, I said. My voice didn't waver. Truth, I added, and I held his gaze. Accountability. The room went still. Whitman studied me for a long moment, long enough that I could feel the weight of everything behind his eyes. Then he nodded once. Slowly. I understand your position, he said. But something in his tone told me. He wasn't agreeing. Not yet, and I'm willing to review this matter. He continued. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Review, he repeated. Yes, Whitman said, internally. That's not enough, Ethan said. Whitman's gaze snapped back to him. And what would be enough, Ethan didn't hesitate. Transparency. A flicker of tension crossed Whitman's face. Brief, but unmistakable. That's a complex request, he said. No, I replied quietly. It's a simple one. Silence again. But this time it felt different, like something had shifted, not resolved, not settled, but moved. Because for the first time, they weren't ignoring it, they weren't dismissing it, they were listening. And that meant one thing. We had their attention, but attention was only the beginning. Whitman didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled together, eyes moving between me and Ethan, like he was recalculating something, not the facts. Those I realized he already understood. He was calculating risk, and we had just become one. "You're asking for accountability," he said slowly. "Yes," I replied, "and transparency." "Yes." He gave a small nod as if acknowledging something inevitable. Then his tone shifted. Subtle, but unmistakable. "Let me be equally clear," he said. "This is not a simple matter." I felt Ethan tense beside me. "Nothing about this has been simple," he said. Whitman's gaze moved to him briefly, then back to me. "Your husband entered into a legally binding agreement," he continued, "one that transferred rights and claims." "Under pressure," I said. "Under negotiation," he corrected. The word made my stomach turn. "That's not the same thing," I said firmly. "It is in the eyes of the law," the woman at the table added calmly. Her voice was smooth, professional, cold. I turned to her. "Is it in the eyes of fairness?" I asked. She didn't answer, because fairness wasn't their language. Whitman exhaled slowly. "This situation," he said, "has implications far beyond a single individual." I leaned forward. "He wasn't just an individual," I said. "He was the reason your projects succeeded." Whitman exhaled slowly. "This situation," he said, "has implications far beyond a single individual." I leaned forward. "He wasn't just an individual," I said. "He was the reason your projects succeeded. That's your interpretation. It's your reality," Ethan cut in. Whitman's jaw tightened slightly, but only for a second. Then he straightened again. "This company has built its reputation over decades," he said. "Hundreds of employees, thousands of clients, and one man who never got his name on any of it," I replied. Silence. Heavy. Measured. Then Whitman did something I hadn't expected. He smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but strategically. "I think we may be approaching this from the wrong angle," he said. My instincts sharpened instantly. "What angle would that be?" I asked. "A constructive one," he replied. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Whitman gestured lightly toward the folder. "It means," he said, "we acknowledge that your husband contributed valuable work." I felt something stir in my chest, but I didn't let it show. And I asked, "And we find a way to recognize that appropriately?" "It means," he said, "we acknowledge that your husband contributed valuable work." I felt something stir in my chest, but I didn't let it show. And I asked, "And we find a way to recognize that appropriately?" Ethan leaned forward. "Define appropriately." Whitman glanced briefly at the woman beside him, then back at us. "Compensation," he said. The word landed like a weight. Not relief, not justice, just weight. "How much?" Ethan asked bluntly. I turned to him, surprised, but also not. He wasn't accepting it. He was testing it. Whitman named a number. It was large, larger than anything Richard and I had ever had, but as soon as I heard it, I knew. It wasn't enough, because it wasn't about money. "You think you can buy this?" I said quietly. Whitman's expression didn't change. "I think we can resolve this," he replied. "That's not resolution," I said. "That's silence." The room shifted again. More tension now. More edge. "You would receive formal acknowledgement," he added. "Privately documented." "Privately," Ethan repeated. "Yes. No public record," I asked. Whitman shook his head slightly. "That would open, you would receive formal acknowledgement," he added. "Privately documented." "Privately?" Ethan repeated. "Yes. No public record," I asked. Whitman shook his head slightly. "That would open complications. Of course it would. Because truth, complicated lies." "No," I said. The word came out before I even thought about it. Firm. Final. Whitman paused. Just slightly. "You haven't heard the full proposal," he said. "I don't need to," I replied. Ethan looked at me, something like pride flickering across his face. "What we're asking for isn't private," I continued. "It isn't quiet. And it isn't something that disappears behind closed doors." Whitman's eyes hardened. "Public accusations," he said, "carry consequences." "So does silence," I replied. He leaned forward now. For the first time, the calm beginning to thin. "You're not just challenging a company," he said. "You're challenging an entire structure." "Then maybe it needs to be challenged," Ethan said. Whitman's gaze snapped to him. "You're an employee here," he said. Ethan didn't flinch. "Not for much longer if this is how it works." That hit harder than anything else so far. I saw it, the flicker of real tension. Because Ethan wasn't just a son now. He was a liability. Whitman leaned back again, his expression tightening slightly. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "We're correcting one." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't controlled. It was strained, because the conversation had shifted from negotiation to confrontation. The second man at the table finally spoke. "You need to understand something," he said, his voice lower, more direct. "If this goes public, it won't be clean." I looked at him. "I never expected it to be." "Your husband signed away his rights," he continued. "That's a fact." "Under pressure," I repeated. "Unprovable," he said. Ethan leaned forward. "Not entirely," he replied. All eyes turned to him. "I have internal access," he continued. "Emails, records, communications that show intent." Whitman's expression sharpened again. "Be careful," he said quietly. Ethan met his gaze. "I am." The warning hung between them, unspoken, but clear. "You push this, and we push back." I felt my heart pounding now, but not from fear, from clarity, because this moment, this exact moment, was the line. They weren't going to give us what we asked for, not willingly, not honestly. They would offer money, silence, control, but not truth, not the thing that actually mattered. I reached into my bag again and pulled out one more document, the Westbrook plans. I slid them across the table. "These are current," I said. Whitman didn't touch them, but the woman beside him did. She scanned the page quickly, and for the first time, her expression changed. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "From the same place as everything else," I replied. Ethan leaned forward. "These corrections aren't in your official system," he said. "But they're necessary." The man beside Whitman frowned. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying," Ethan said, "that you're still relying on work you never credited silence. Thicker now, more dangerous, And if you ignore those corrections, I added. The woman looked up, her expression tight. You risk structural failure. That did it. That was the moment everything shifted. Because this wasn't just about the past anymore. This was about now. About liability, about risk, about exposure. Whitman's calm cracked. Just slightly, but enough. You're making a very serious allegation, he said. I'm stating a very real possibility, Ethan replied. The room went still, completely still, because now we weren't just a problem. We were a threat, and they knew it. The silence that followed felt different from the others. Not controlled, not calculated, but fragile. Like something was about to break. Whitman didn't speak right away. None of them did, because for the first time, they weren't leading the conversation anymore. We were. You're saying, the woman finally spoke, her voice slower now, that there are active risks in one of our current developments. Ethan didn't hesitate. Yes. And that those risks are tied to undocumented corrections. Yes. Her eyes moved back to the papers, then to Whitman. That was the moment I saw it. The shift in power. Subtle, but undeniable. Because this was no longer about a past injustice they could bury. This was about a present danger they couldn't ignore. Whitman exhaled slowly, then leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. Let's clarify something, he said. His tone had changed, still controlled, but no longer untouchable. If what you're suggesting is true, he continued, then the issue is not just recognition. No, I said, quietly. It's liability. Yes. The word hung heavy in the air. Liability, the one thing companies like his couldn't afford to ignore. Whitman nodded once, as if acknowledging the reality of that. Then his eyes locked onto mine. You understand, he said, that making these claims publicly would have consequences far beyond this room. I held his gaze. So would ignoring them. A flicker of tension crossed his face again. More visible this time, because now he wasn't just managing a situation. He was losing control of it. So would ignoring them. A flicker of tension crossed his face again. More visible this time, because now he wasn't just managing a situation. He was losing control of it. Ethan opened his laptop again. I ran a comparison, he said, turning the screen toward them. Between the official Westbrook plans and the versions we found in my father's documents. The second man leaned forward, frowning. What am I looking at? Structural load adjustments, Ethan replied, specifically in the support columns on levels 12 through 16. The man's expression tightened. That's already been reviewed. No, Ethan said calmly. It's been assumed. There's a difference. The woman stood up slightly, stepping closer to the screen. Show me, she said. Ethan zoomed in, highlighted the section. These corrections, he explained, were made outside the official system. But they address a stress imbalance that would develop over time. How much time, she asked. Ethan didn't sugarcoat it. Years, he said. Maybe less under certain conditions. The room went quiet again. But this time, it wasn't tension. It was fear. Real, undeniable fear. Because now they could see it. Not just the past, not just the injustice, but the consequence. Whitman stood up slowly, walked toward the window, his back to us, thinking, calculating. But this time, the calculation was different, because now the equation included risk, public risk, financial risk, legal risk. He turned back around, and when he did, the calm mask was still there, but thinner, more fragile. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Ethan looked at me. I nodded. "This was it. We want full acknowledgement of Richard Winslow's contributions," I said. Whitman said nothing. "Public acknowledgement," I continued. The second man shifted immediately. "That's not Whitman," raised a hand, silencing him. "Continue," he said. I didn't look away. "We want his name attached to the projects he worked on," I said. "Past and present." Whitman's jaw tightened slightly. "And—" I took a breath. "And we want a full review of current developments that may be relying on his undocumented corrections." The woman crossed her arms. "That would trigger audits," she said. "Yes," Ethan replied. "Major ones. Yes." Whitman studied us again, longer this time, deeper, as if trying to find hesitation, doubt, weakness. But there wasn't any, because we had already crossed that line. "We're not asking for something unreasonable," I said quietly. Whitman gave a faint, almost humorless smile. "From your perspective, perhaps not. And from yours?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, because from his perspective, this was everything. Reputation, control, power, but also risk. The kind that could unravel years of carefully built success. He walked back to the table slowly, placed both hands on it, leaning in slightly. "This company," he said, "has never admitted fault publicly." I met his gaze. "Then this will be the first time." Silence. Then Ethan spoke again. "If you don't," he said, "this doesn't stay here." The words were calm, measured, but they carried weight, because we both knew what they meant. Whitman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that a threat?" "No," Ethan said. "It's a fact." The room held its breath, and for the first time, Whitman didn't push back. He didn't dismiss. He didn't redirect, because he couldn't, not anymore. Minutes passed. No one spoke. Then finally, Whitman exhaled slowly, and something in him shifted. Not completely, but enough. "We will conduct an internal review," he said. Ethan started to respond, but I stopped him with a glance. "Let him finish." And Whitman continued. "We will assess the appropriate form of acknowledgement." "That's not what we asked for," I said. His eyes flickered. "Just slightly." "Public acknowledgement," I added. "Not internal." The tension surged again. But now it felt different. Because we were closer. Closer to something real. Whitman looked at the others, then back at us. And for a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not arrogance, not control, but hesitation. Because this was no longer about winning. It was about minimizing loss. And we had made that loss very real. He straightened slowly. "Give me time," he said. I shook my head. "No." His expression hardened again. "This isn't something that happens overnight. It's something that should have happened years ago," I replied. The words landed, heavy, final, and for a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke, because the truth was sitting there now, unavoidable, unmovable, and no amount of money or silence or power was going to push it back into the dark. Not this time. We didn't leave the room immediately. For a moment, none of us moved, because something had shifted, not just in the conversation, but in the outcome. Whitman stood still, his hands resting lightly on the table, his expression no longer as composed as when we first walked in. He wasn't winning anymore. He knew it, and so did we. "We'll be in touch," he said finally. It wasn't a dismissal. It wasn't control. It was delay. And for the first time, delay didn't feel like power. It felt like hesitation. I stood up slowly, gathering my things. Ethan closed his laptop. Neither of us said anything else, because there was nothing left to say in that room. We had drawn the line. Now it was their move. The drive home was quiet, not tense, not heavy, just quiet, like something inside both of us was still settling. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. But I could feel it, the change. Not just in the situation, in him. "You did good in there," I said softly. He let out a small breath. "I almost didn't," he admitted. I turned to him. "What do you mean?" "For a second," he said, "when they mentioned compensation, I thought about it." I nodded. "I know." He glanced at me briefly. "It would have been easier." "Yes." Silence again. Then, "But it wouldn't have been right." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "It wouldn't have been." He tightened his grip on the wheel slightly. "I spent years believing Dad was small," he said. The word hung there, heavy. "I know," I replied gently. And now he continued, his voice quieter. "I realized he was carrying more than I ever understood." I looked out the window for a moment, watching the city pass by. "So did I," I admitted. That truth sat between us. Not painful anymore, just honest. The call came 3 days later. Not from Whitman, from Ethan. I answered immediately. "Ethan, Mom," he said. "It's happening." My heart skipped. "What is—" "They're releasing a statement," he said. "Public." I stood up instinctively. "What kind of statement?" "A full acknowledgement," he replied. "They're naming Dad, his contributions, the projects." My breath caught. They agreed. "Yes, and the current projects. They're launching internal reviews," he said, "including Westbrook." Relief washed through me. But it wasn't just relief. It was something deeper. Something I hadn't expected to feel so strongly. Validation. "They're doing it because they have to," Ethan added. "I know," I said, "but they're still doing it." And that mattered, more than anything. The story spread faster than I imagined. Local news first, then regional, then larger outlets picked it up. A quiet contractor, a hidden contributor, a man who had shaped the foundations of an entire town without ever being named. Until now. I sat in the Livy being named. Until now. I sat in the Leaving room watching the television as they showed images of buildings I had passed my entire life. Buildings I had never connected to Richard. Now they all felt different. They're calling him the invisible architect. Room watching the television as they showed images of buildings I had passed my entire life. Buildings I had never connected to Richard. Now they all felt different. They're calling him the invisible architect, Ethan said from behind me. I turned slightly. "What do you think about that?" He smiled faintly. "I think they finally noticed him." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "They did." But in my heart, I knew something else. He had never been invisible. Not really. Just unseen. A week later, we stood downtown. In front of the Civic Center. The same building from the blueprint. The same one that had started everything. There was a small crowd gathered. Nothing massive, but enough. A podium had been set up. A plaque still covered stood beside it. Ethan stood next to me, hands in his pockets, looking different, calmer, grounded, like something inside him had settled into place. "They asked me to speak," he said quietly. I looked at him. "You're going to." He nodded. "I think I should." I smiled. "I think you should too." The event began simply. No grand spectacle. Just words. Truth. Acknowledgement. A representative from Whitman spoke first. Carefully. Measured. Admitting oversight. Recognizing contributions. Trying to reclaim dignity in a situation they had nearly lost control of. Then Ethan stepped forward. My heart swelled as he stood at the podium. This wasn't the man who had dismissed his father. This was someone else. Someone who had learned. Who had grown. My father, he began, his voice steady, was not the kind of man who asked for recognition. I felt my chest tighten. He believed in the work itself. Ethan continued. In doing things right, even when no one was watching. A pause. But that doesn't mean his work didn't matter, he said. And it doesn't mean it should have stayed hidden. The crowd was silent, listening. He didn't build for credit, Ethan said. He built because he cared. Another pause. And today, we're not just recognizing what he did. His voice softened slightly. We're recognizing who he was. Tears blurred my vision, because that was the truth, not just the work. The man. When Ethan stepped back, the cloth covering the plaque was pulled away. There it was. Richard Winslow. Engraved. Permanent. Seen. I stepped forward slowly, my fingers brushing lightly over the letters. For a moment, when Ethan stepped back, the cloth covering the plaque was pulled away. There it was. Richard Winslow. Engraved. Permanent. Seen. I stepped forward slowly, my fingers brushing lightly over the letters. For a moment, the world faded. And it was just me. And him. You should have told me, I whispered. But deep down, I understood why he hadn't. Because he had never done it for this. He had done it for us. And now, finally, the world knew. Life didn't go back to normal after that. It couldn't. Because normal had been built on something incomplete, something unseen. And now, that truth had finally been brought into the light. The days that followed the ceremony felt quieter, not empty, just settled, like a storm had passed, leaving everything a little clearer. Ethan came by more often, not out of obligation, not because he felt he had to, but because he wanted to. We sat together in the evenings sometimes. No television, no distractions. Just conversation. Real conversation. I keep thinking about him, Ethan said one night, leaning back in his chair. So do I replied. He looked down at his hands. I missed it, he admitted. All those years, I thought I understood who he was. I nodded slowly. I did too. But I didn't, he said. Not really. I smiled gently. He didn't make it easy, I said. Ethan let out a small breath. No, he didn't. We sat in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable, just reflective. I used to think success meant being seen, Ethan said. I turned to him. And now, he hesitated. Then, now I think it means being right, even when no one notices. My chest tightened slightly. Because that sounded like Richard. You're starting to understand him? I said softly. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he said. I think I finally am. A few weeks later, Ethan made a decision. One I didn't expect. I'm leaving Whitman, he told me. I blinked. You are? He nodded. They made changes, he said. Internal policies, oversight reviews, transparency measures. That's good, isn't it? It is, he said. But. He looked at me. I don't want to be part of something that needed to be forced into doing the right thing. I understood that. Deeply. So, what will you do? I asked. A small smile appeared on his face. I've been thinking about that. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Careful, I said. That usually leads to something big. He chuckled softly. Maybe. Then he leaned forward slightly. I want to build something, he said. The word hung in the air. Familiar. Echoing something from years ago. Something honest, he continued. Something that doesn't hide the people behind it. My heart warmed. That sounds like your father. Ethan smiled. Yeah, he said. It does. Not everything changed overnight, but something fundamental did. The way we spoke, the way we remembered, the way we saw. Richard was no longer just a memory of quiet dinners and worn hands. He was something more now. Not because the world finally recognized him, but because we finally did. One afternoon, I found myself back in the garage. The toolbox sat where it always had, unchanged. But I wasn't the same woman who had once looked at it without understanding. I walked over slowly, ran my hand along the metal, the dents, the scratches, the marks of a life lived fully, even if it wasn't loudly. You kept everything together, I said softly. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt full, like he was still there, in the work, in the care, in the choices he made, even the ones that cost him everything. I opened the toolbox again, not to search this time, just to see. The tools rested where I had placed them. Simple, worn, perfect, just like him. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was uncovering something hidden. I felt like I was honoring something known, something that had always been there. I just hadn't seen it clearly. Until now. That evening, Ethan came by again. He stepped into the garage, looking around quietly. I used to hate this place, he admitted. I smiled faintly. I remember. It felt small, he said. And now? He looked at the toolbox, then at me. It feels different. How? He took a slow breath, like everything important started here. I nodded, because it did. He walked over, running his hand lightly over the edge of the workbench. I wish I had told him, he said quietly. Told him what? That I understood him, Ethan said. My chest tightened. I stepped closer. He knew, I said gently. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, he said. I don't think he did. I reached out and placed my hand on his arm. Then show him now, I said. He looked at me. How I smiled softly. By the way you live, he held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, he said. I can do that. We stood there together, in the quiet, in the place where everything had begun. And for the first time, it didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like something had finally been found. Life has a quiet way of revealing truth. Sometimes not when we're ready, but when we need it most. For years, I believed I understood the man I shared my life with. I thought I knew his limits, his place in the world, the size of his impact. But I was wrong. Not because he lied to me, but because he carried more than he ever allowed himself to show. And maybe that's something many of us overlook. We measure people by what we can see, titles, recognition, success in the eyes of others. But the truth is, some of the most meaningful lives are lived quietly. Some of the strongest people are the ones who carry burdens without asking for acknowledgement. Some of the greatest contributions are never announced, only felt. My husband didn't fight for credit. He fought for us. He chose silence so we could have peace, and in doing so, he built something far greater than buildings. He built a legacy of integrity. So if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Don't wait for the world to tell you someone matters. Look closer. Listen deeper. Because the people we think are ordinary often carry extraordinary stories. And sometimes, the ones we underestimate the most are the ones holding everything together. If this story touched you, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever misjudged someone close to you? Or realized too late just how much they had done? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one, and if you believe in stories that reveal hidden truths and honor the quiet strength in people, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, wherever you're watching from and whatever time it is. Thank you for being here.